So after taking a little inventory of my channel, it occurred to me that I've only really talked about relatively modern history topics. And really, I think the furthest back that I go has been maybe the 17th century. But I want to talk about all the things. I want to talk about all the cultures, the people, the events from multiple different periods of time. So in this video, we're going to take a trip back into ancient Rome and talk about one of the most vilified Roman emperors of all time, Nero. Dun dun dun. Cue the thunder and the rain, storms, and all that good stuff. I want to talk about some of the many atrocities ancient historians claim Emperor Nero committed during his lifetime. Now, I won't be talking about his supposed involvement in the Great Fire of Rome. I don't want to talk about it. It's been talked about so many times. It's just boring to me at this point. Not to say that what I'm going to cover hasn't necessarily been covered many times in itself, but I don't know. The Great Fire, I'm sure there are plenty of videos on YouTube that can cover that. So we're not going to talk about that today. But first, like and subscribe to support the Old Dirty History channel. Nero's full name was Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, aka a mouthful. But his birth name was Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus. He was born on December 15th in 37 AD in Antium to Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus and Agrippina the Younger. Agrippina was the great-granddaughter of Emperor Augustus, who was the first Roman emperor, and she was also the sister of the infamous Emperor Caligula. Nero's father was described by the ancient Roman historian Suetonius as a man loathsome in every respect. The historian also claims that when his father's friends were congratulating him on the birth of Nero, that his father said, quote, "Nothing but what was detestable and pernicious to the public could ever be produced of him and Agrippina." Honestly, if all of the depictions of Nero's father and mother are true, I can see that. And at least he was honest about being a shitty person. Now, something I want to note at the beginning of this video is that if you're not familiar with ancient Roman history and how it was recorded, much of what we know today was documented by ancient Roman historians who like to tell very, very long tales. And so the problem with a lot of these histories is that they really can't be trusted. But I mean, this case can also be said for history as a whole. Someone could write a lie on a piece of paper 200 years ago, and you could find this same piece of paper today and use it as a reference in a paper you write. I think I just described history in a couple sentences. The ancient Romans are an exceptional case of this fabrication of history. Self-interest and propaganda was definitely an issue with these historians. Oftentimes, they were politicians as well. So it's just something to keep in the back of your mind as we traverse the life of Nero. At just 3 years old, Nero's father died. And after his death, Nero's inheritance was taken from him and he was forced to live with an aunt. And then his mother, Agrippina, was exiled after being accused of taking part in a failed assassination attempt against her brother and then Emperor Caligula. See, Nero's mother was constantly playing chess behind the scenes, with the purpose of ultimately getting her son, Nero, on the throne.
The shit's chess, it ain't checkers.
When Caligula was assassinated in 41 AD, his successor and uncle Claudius became emperor. And when Claudius became emperor, Nero's mother's banishment was revoked and Nero was granted his inheritance left by his late father. When Nero's mother returned, she had to marry somebody. So, she was on the prowl looking for a new hubby. And she needed to marry somebody with influence as well as money to ensure the safety of her and her son. And she couldn't just marry anyone. She had to marry somebody who had shmoney as well as influence to protect the well-being of her as well as her son. So she married a recently divorced man named Paesinus Crispus, who was a wealthy orator. Orators were people who performed public speaking, and it was considered to be an art form. This was a full-on profession that was pretty popular during this time. Not long after marrying Agrippina, Crispus died in 47, and as a result, Agrippina inherited all of his money. The historian Suetonius, once again with the gossip, suggests that she poisoned Crispus because his death worked in Nero's mother's favor, because what she really wanted was to marry the emperor Claudius. And just her luck, the stars aligned when Claudius had his then wife executed for conspiracy to overthrow him. And despite the fact that Claudius was Agrippina's uncle, you heard right, uncle. They wed on New Year's Day in 49 AD. And no, this coupling was not normal, even by ancient Roman standards. It's said that this was one of many moves on Agrippina's part to get Nero on the throne. And after that, her work was not done. There was much more scheming and plotting to be had on Nero's mother's behalf. This right here was just Agrippina, laying the foundation. Okay, this was phase one. She had several steps. Eventually, Nero's mother convinced Claudius to adopt Nero and even favor him over his biological son, whose name was Britannicus, and ultimately making Nero his heir. And she was also able to persuade the emperor to marry his daughter, Octavia, to her son, Nero. This would mean that Nero and Octavia were simultaneously spouses and step-siblings. What in the Lannister bullshit is this? All of Nero's mother's scheming paid off when Claudius died in 54 AD. And of course, it was rumored that yet again, Agrippina had poisoned someone, Claudius. Just in case you were wondering. Agrippina made sure Nero ascended to the throne without issue. And at just 17 years old, Nero was now the 5th emperor of Rome. During the early years of Nero's reign, his mother had a lot of power and a lot of influence. Essentially, she was running things. Shortly after Nero's reign started, his stepbrother, the previous emperor's son, Britannicus, was murdered by Nero and his mother, and I'll let you guess how he was murdered. Now, this baseless claim was made by the historian Tacitus, and this claim has been disputed by scientists and historians alike. When I first read his name, I thought that it was pronounced Tacitus. I probably still didn't pronounce it correctly, but I know it's not Tacitus. At least I don't think it is, pretty sure. Or I at least thought it was Tacitus. Anyway, I had this whole joke planned about him being tacky, because I thought his name was Tacitus. After a few years went by, Nero grew tired of his mother's overstepping, and our gossiping historians Suetonius, Cassius Dio, and Tacitus claim that Nero became so fed up with his mother that he made the decision to kill her. Nero's tutor, Seneca, and his chief advisor, Burrus, encouraged Nero to break from his mother's influence. What's interesting is that these were the 3 people that supported and pushed for Nero's rise to the throne. It was his mother, Seneca, and Burrus. But Burrus and Seneca, they were like, your mother needs to go. Just shoot. All 3 historians give their take on how Nero murdered his mother. Suetonius claims that Nero invited his mother to a celebration under the false pretext of a reconciliation. He states, quote, "She left Baeza by the same way, but the vessel was so contrived that it was to break to pieces when out at sea. It only partly broke, and Agrippina saved herself by swimming to the shore. Agrippina fled to her villa near the Lucrine lake and informed her son of her happy escape." And then from there, the historian claims that Nero sent some men over to his mother's home, mafia style, to kill her. And of course, they got to make it even more weird and sinister by claiming that Nero went to the villa himself to admire the beauty of her dead body. They can't just stop. They always got to take it the extra mile and just make stuff real creepy and gross. Throughout the duration of Nero's very short life, he had taken on many, many lovers, which is not unusual for this time. Nero and his wife Octavia wed when Nero was 15 and Octavia 13 or 14. And as I already pointed out, they were both step-siblings and spouses. After a while, Nero became bored of Octavia. And after several failed attempts to strangle her, how that works, I have no idea, Nero divorced her on the grounds of being incapable of bearing children in 62. But really, Nero had fallen in love with someone else, a woman named Poppaea Sabina, who was married, by the way, but that didn't stop Poppaea and Nero from conceiving a child of their own. Just 12 days after divorcing Octavia, Nero married his mistress, Poppaea. The people, they didn't really take too kindly to this divorce because she was the late Emperor Claudius's daughter, and it was kind of a dumb move on Nero's part because this marriage gave him legitimacy. It was the whole reason why his mother pushed for it. And so after this backlash, Nero decided to have Octavia banished. But ultimately, Nero would go on to have Octavia put to death. And his excuse was adultery, which was a baseless claim. This woman was put through so much. She was made to marry her stepbrother and then had several attempts on her life by her husband and then banished into exile and then murdered. What a life. He would not keep still while filming this. All I could hear is little pitter-patter, pitter-patter, pitter-patters in the background. Anyway, I couldn't even imagine having to deal with all that bullshit. Poor Octavia. And what's crazy is the side piece, Poppaea, who he ended up marrying, she would also meet a horrible demise. Because later, Nero would go on to murder Poppaea. While pregnant with their child and sick, Poppaea was kicked by Nero after questioning him on his whereabouts when he returned home late one night. And as a result, she died in 65 AD. It's very doubtful that this is how she met her end. Some historians have speculated that she actually died from complications during her pregnancy. In addition to killing his second wife, Poppaea, these historians also claim that Nero murdered her son, who was conceived from her previous marriage, which would make this child Nero's stepson. It was said that he ordered people he had enslaved to drown the poor young boy while he was fishing. And why? Why would he do that, you might be wondering? Because the boy had the nerve to act as an emperor while playing with other little kids. Now, Nero would go on to kill so many people, whether they be friend, foe, family member, lover, it didn't matter. Random stranger, everybody could get it.
Pull up on me.
He even had his chief advisor / General Burrus killed by poisoning. One day, Nero had some medicine sent to Burrus to help him with a swollen throat, but the medicine was poisonous. And Burrus, again, he was one of the two, well, really the three people, including his mother, who supported him from before he became emperor throughout his youth to his ascension, and really helped maintain and rule everything while Nero was off whoring and murdering and doing whatever. But that didn't matter, because it said that at this point, Nero no longer cared about public opinion. He was going to indulge himself in whatever nefarious or depraved actions he so desired. In addition to murder, the historians Cassius Dio and Suetonius documented an entire list of depraved shit Nero participated in, like terrorizing citizens at night while dressed in costumes and wigs, his own subjects. He would go around insulting women, murdering and hurting random people, breaking into people's homes and businesses, and quote, practicing lewdness on boys. What that entails, I do not know, and I do not want to know. What I found to be most interesting about this is, per this same historian, Nero believed that his costumes granted him complete anonymity, but the whole community knew it was him because he was apparently the only person that would go around doing this stupid shit. I find this to be kind of hilarious. I'm just imagining this fool wearing some dry ass wig with one of those fake little mustaches and some glasses, trying to act like he's not the emperor of Rome. As Nero became more bold, he eventually dropped the disguise altogether. Suetonius claims that Nero loved to sing, and he loved it so much that he would participate in these singing contests. God, I feel sorry for the person who chose to compete with Emperor Nero in a singing competition, or any competition for that matter. The odds don't seem to be good. It feels like a lose-lose type of situation. While he would sing, Nero would have the gates locked so that no one in the audience was allowed to leave for any reason. So much so that women were forced to give birth in the audience to the soothing sounds of Nero's voice. People would leap over walls to escape, and some would even fake their own deaths to be carried out. I'm sorry, but am I really supposed to believe this shit? I mean, seriously. Sometimes when I read these histories, I think to myself, did this historian, politician really truly believe that this shit sounded plausible? I mean, yeah, crazier things have happened throughout history, but it just gets weird. After the death of his second wife, Pompeia, Nero married another mistress named Stalia Messalina around 66. I just know I botched that name up, and it's probably not the only one. However, Messalina was married to a whole different man while they were having an affair. So in that same year, her husband was forced to kill himself so that Nero could marry her. But even after all that, Nero was not satisfied. He took on another lover, an enslaved boy named Sporus. The short life of Sporus is truly a heartbreaking one. Sporus resembled Nero's second wife, Pompeia, and he fell in love with Sporus and had them castrated. This is something enslavers did in ancient Rome to enslaved young boys who were forced to serve as sex slaves. And the term used then to describe these brutalized children was pure delicatus, which I believe translates to delicate boy. They were castrated to preserve their youthful looks. Nero would go on to marry Sporus while still married to Messalina, and after castrating the boy, he made Sporus present as female, declared them empress, and called them Pompeia. He completely stripped Sporus of whatever identity they had. Sporus would then be taken by a Praetorian prefect after the death of Nero, and this man also treated Sporus as his wife and referred to them as Pompeia. And he probably thought Sporus could be used as a pawn in his attempt to become emperor, since Nero had made Sporus the empress. In 69, Sporus was taken by yet another power-hungry man after the second one was killed while attempting to make himself emperor. This was a very violent time, with several people vying to be emperor and dying in their attempts. And this man, who was actually married to the real Pompeia at one point, lasted merely 3 months as emperor. Imagine marrying someone who was forced to take on the identity of your ex-wife, and then after you marry this person, you continue to have them present as your ex-wife, your late ex-wife. That's just bonkers. His rival, Vitellius, had planned to use Sporus in a public display of humiliation by forcing Sporus to participate in the reenactment of the Roman mythological story, the rape of Proserpina, at a gladiator show. To avoid this horrific fate, Sporus ended their life. Nero would die at 30 years of age in 68 AD by taking his own life. And who knows what all is true and what isn't true about Nero? Some of the stuff is just way too ridiculous to believe, and some of it is entertaining. And while I would not be surprised that there's some truth in there, at least one would hope there's some truth in there, ancient Rome was a very brutal time and place, so I wouldn't be surprised. And by no means did I cover every messed up thing that it was recorded or claimed that Emperor Nero did. There's literally a laundry list. These are just some of the things that I personally wanted to discuss in this video. What I found to be really interesting is that typically these historians weren't even around alive during the time of a lot of these people's lives that they're talking about. Nero died in 68, and the historian Tacitus was born in 56. Suetonius was born in 69, and Cassius Dio was born in freaking 165. That's almost 100 years after Nero died. I'm not saying that Nero was a good guy or a bad guy either way, but you do have to question these histories. But I do have to admit, the historical tea from the ancient Romans was pretty hot. They were given Game of Thrones and The Last Kingdom.